The very first thing you need to know is this: my wife is not the kind of person you can bully, and I am definitely not the kind of man who backs down when someone tries to push me around. When we bought our lakefront cabin, we thought we were buying peace, quiet, and a fresh start away from the chaos of the city. The view of the water, the trees swaying in the breeze, and the thought of morning coffee on the deck, it felt like the dream we had been working toward for years. But all that peace came crashing down the moment a woman everyone in the community secretly called HOA Karen came marching into our driveway with her sunglasses perched on her head and a thick folder of papers tucked under her arm. She had that sharp, no-nonsense walk of someone who thinks they own the world, and before I could even greet her, she launched into her act. "Welcome to the community," she said flatly, not even smiling. "Now, before you get too comfortable, there's a mandatory initiation fee of $250,000 for joining the association. You'll need to pay it within 30 days or we'll have no choice but to begin eviction proceedings." I remember almost choking on the water bottle I was drinking. $250,000? For what? Was she selling us a private jet with the house? My wife, always calm and measured, set down the box she was carrying and faced Karen directly. "Excuse me," she said, "but could you please show us where in the HOA bylaws this is written?" Karen didn't like that question one bit. She snapped open her folder and pulled out a stack of generic papers, HOA guidelines that talked about things like grass height, paint colors, and trash pickup days, but nowhere did it mention anything remotely close to a $250,000 initiation fee. Still, Karen pressed on, as if she could bully us into believing it was real. "I don't have to explain myself," she barked. "This is how things are done here. Everyone pays the fee. If you don't, you won't last long in this neighborhood." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "That's funny, because I talked to 3 neighbors yesterday and not a single one mentioned paying $250,000 just to move in." For the first time, her smug grin flickered. She wasn't expecting us to push back. Most people, I later learned, either panicked and gave in to her bullying or quietly sold their homes and left. Karen had run off families before us with her endless demands, fake fines, and intimidation tactics. But she was about to learn that my wife and I weren't like the others. As we continued unpacking that day, Karen kept circling like a vulture. Every time we carried something into the house, she had another complaint. "That moving truck is parked too close to the curb. You can't have that kind of patio chair without approval. Your grill is not the right model for this community." It was endless. She scribbled things on her clipboard, muttering to herself, and at one point even walked up onto our porch uninvited, as if she was conducting an inspection. My wife finally stopped her at the door. "This is private property," she said firmly. "You are not allowed to step inside." Karen gave her that sharp little smile that people wear when they think they still have the upper hand and hissed, "Oh, we'll see about that. I'll have the cops down here before you know it." That night, over dinner, my wife and I laughed about it. "She thinks we're just going to hand her $250,000 like it's pocket change," I said. My wife shook her head, cutting into her steak. "It's a scare tactic. She's probably been pulling the same trick on other homeowners, and I bet most of them caved. But she doesn't realize who she's dealing with." I grinned at that because I knew exactly what she meant. My wife has been through far more dangerous and intimidating situations than a suburban power-hungry Karen. Her calmness wasn't because she didn't take it seriously, it was because she had already decided Karen wasn't worth getting worked up over. The next morning, as we were sipping coffee on the deck overlooking the lake, Karen strutted by again, this time dragging a neighbor along with her. She pointed at our house and started ranting loudly enough for us to hear. "These people think they don't have to follow the rules. They're freeloaders. They think they can just move in and ignore the HOA." The neighbor looked uncomfortable, nodding but clearly not wanting to be caught in the middle. We waved at him, and he gave us a quick, apologetic smile before hurrying off. Karen, of course, wasn't finished. She came right up to the edge of the deck and started again. Listen, I'm giving you one last chance. Pay the 250 grand, or I will personally have you escorted out. My wife calmly set her coffee mug down and said, Karen, this conversation is over. If you have legitimate paperwork, bring it. If not, stop harassing us. That was the moment Karen's face turned red with fury. She wasn't used to people standing up to her. All day, she tried new tactics. She left a typed letter taped to our door with the words, "Final Notice," in bold at the top, even though we hadn't received a single official notice before. She slipped threatening notes into our mailbox claiming daily fines of $5,000 were being added to our account. She even stood in front of our property shouting at the landscapers we'd hired, warning them that they'd never get paid if they worked for us. It was ridiculous, like dealing with a cartoon villain who thought she had absolute power. But the real breaking point came that evening. We had invited my brother and his kids over for a small welcome barbecue. The kids were playing by the dock, the smell of burgers filled the air, and for a while, it felt like we could ignore her nonsense. But sure enough, right as we sat down to eat, Karen barged through the side gate like she owned the place. "This grill is not approved," she snapped. "This gathering is against HOA guidelines. And if you don't shut it down, I'll call the police right now." My wife stood, calm and steady, and said, "Karen, you need to leave before you embarrass yourself any further." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she practically spat the words out, "Fine. You want to play tough? Let's see how tough you are when the cops drag you out of here in handcuffs." She stormed off, her phone already in her hand, dialing. And that, right there, was the moment we knew things were about to get interesting, because Karen had just set into motion something she could never have prepared for. The very next morning, we woke up to the sound of tires crunching on gravel and heavy footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was another delivery truck, but when I looked out the window, my stomach tightened. 2 police cruisers were parked right in front of our driveway, lights flashing just enough to get attention. And there, standing with her arms folded and a smug little smirk on her face, was Karen. She had clearly called them the night before, and now she looked like she had just won the lottery. She was dressed for the occasion too, clipboard in hand, hair tied back, and that air of self-importance radiating off her like she was the sheriff of the neighborhood. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, calm but alert, and walked toward our front door. Karen marched alongside them, already pointing in our direction. "That's them. That's the family I told you about. They're trespassing, they haven't paid their fees, and they're violating multiple HOA rules. You need to remove them immediately," she blurted, her voice sharp with excitement. I opened the door before they could knock, determined to face this head-on. "Good morning, officers," I said evenly. My wife came to stand beside me, calm as ever, her face showing no sign of nerves. The lead officer gave a polite nod. "Sir, ma'am, we've received a call about some alleged violations here. We'll need to ask you a few questions and see some identification." Before I could even reach for my wallet, Karen cut in again, waving her arms wildly. "Don't bother asking them anything. Just throw them out. They don't belong here. They refuse to pay the mandatory initiation fee, they're disrespecting the community, and they're hosting unauthorized events on their property." Her words came out in one breath, dripping with anger and entitlement. I glanced at my wife, who calmly stepped forward. "Officers, if you'd like to see our paperwork, we have everything in order. And as for this so-called initiation fee, it doesn't exist. She's been harassing us since the day we moved in." The officers exchanged looks, clearly aware that something didn't add up. The younger one reached for his notepad, probably to start writing down details, but Karen wasn't having it. "Don't listen to them. I'm the HOA president. My word is law here," she snapped. That last part actually made me laugh out loud, and the officers looked at her like she had just grown a second head. The lead officer finally turned to her, his voice calm but firm. Ma'am, just to clarify, this is a civil matter. Even if there are HOA fees, it doesn't justify a police eviction without a court order. Do you understand that? Karen froze for a second, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. She wasn't expecting pushback from the police. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people are a menace. They're trying to undermine the HOA. If you don't remove them right now, I'll go above your heads and have your jobs on the line. The arrogance in her voice was unbelievable. She actually thought she could bully the police the same way she bullied her neighbors. The younger officer shook his head slightly, clearly irritated, but the lead officer kept his cool. He turned back to me and my wife. Sir, ma'am, may I please see your identification? I handed over mine, and he looked at it briefly before passing it back. Then my wife handed him hers, and that's when everything shifted. The officer's eyes locked on her card, and his expression changed instantly. His posture straightened, his face grew serious, and in one swift movement, he snapped to attention, standing tall like a soldier in front of his commanding officer. The younger officer followed suit, confused at first but then realizing exactly who he was standing in front of. Karen, on the other hand, didn't get it. She frowned, looking from one cop to the other. What's going on? Why are you suddenly acting weird? She demanded, hands on her hips. The lead officer ignored her completely and addressed my wife with a respectful tone I had only seen in military ceremonies. General, he said firmly, I didn't realize. My apologies for the intrusion. Do you need us to handle this situation for you? Karen's jaw practically hit the ground. General? What are you talking about? She's no general. She's just some housewife who moved in and thinks she can break every rule in the book. She laughed nervously, waiting for them to agree with her, but neither officer moved a muscle. They kept their eyes fixed on my wife, waiting for her command. I almost felt sorry for Karen in that moment, almost. She had no idea who she had been messing with. My wife wasn't just any homeowner. She was a retired U.S. Army general, a decorated leader who had commanded thousands and carried the kind of authority that doesn't vanish just because you move into a quiet lakefront neighborhood. She never bragged about her past, never flaunted her rank, and never sought recognition. But in that moment, the truth came out whether she wanted it to or not. Karen's face turned beet red as she sputtered, This is ridiculous. You can't just salute her like that. I'm the HOA president. I'm in charge here. Her voice cracked as she realized the power dynamic had completely flipped. The officer turned to her finally, his tone sharp now. Ma'am, you've made a false report. That's a serious offense. Do you understand that we could arrest you right now for wasting police resources and attempting to harass these homeowners? The smug confidence drained from her face in an instant. She took a small step back, clutching her clipboard like a shield. I was just enforcing the rules, she stammered. I didn't mean any harm. But her excuses didn't matter anymore. The entire neighborhood had started to notice the commotion. People peeked out from their porches and windows, whispering as they realized what was happening. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was finally being put in her place, and it wasn't by a neighbor, it was by the very police she had called to do her dirty work. The younger officer spoke up now, his patience clearly gone. Ma'am, if we get another false call from you regarding this property, we'll have no choice but to pursue charges. Do I make myself clear? Karen nodded quickly, her eyes darting nervously between the two officers. Her smugness was completely gone, replaced by fear. She muttered something under her breath and started backing away toward her house, defeated for the first time in who knows how long. Meanwhile, the lead officer turned back to my wife, still standing tall and calm on the porch. General, would you like to press charges? He asked respectfully. My wife shook her head slightly. Not today, she said. But let her know that this nonsense ends here. If she bothers us or any of these neighbors again, I won't hesitate to take it further. The officer nodded firmly. Understood, ma'am. And just like that, the cops walked back to their cruisers, leaving Karen fuming silently in her driveway, her entire plan in shambles. The neighborhood was buzzing now, everyone whispering about the fact that Karen had just been humiliated in front of half the community, and by the one woman she thought she could bully into submission. Little did Karen know, this was just the beginning. The silence that followed the police cars pulling away was unlike anything I had ever experienced in a neighborhood like this. Normally, when a situation with police ends, there's a sense of relief or maybe tension still hanging in the air. But this time, it was almost like the entire street was holding its breath. Neighbors who had been peeking out from behind curtains and standing quietly on porches now stepped forward, whispering among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smirked knowingly, and a few even had their phones out, having recorded the entire embarrassing scene that Karen had staged for herself. My wife and I simply walked back inside, calm and composed, but I couldn't help but chuckle. Karen had called the cops to try to humiliate us, but instead, she had ended up being the one humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. But the thing about people like Karen is they don't stop after one defeat. They take it personally. They see it as a challenge, like they've lost a battle but are still determined to win the war. And sure enough, the very next day, Karen was back at it. I spotted her pacing up and down the sidewalk in front of our property early in the morning, phone in one hand and clipboard in the other. She was clearly scheming. By mid-afternoon, a fresh notice had been taped to our front door. This one was typed, stamped with what looked like a fake HOA seal, and filled with a laundry list of violations that were so absurd I had to laugh. It claimed our grass was unauthorized length, our mailbox was non-compliant, and our deck furniture was improperly colored. Each violation carried a fine, and the total she claimed we owed came to nearly $20,000. I brought the notice inside and set it on the kitchen table where my wife was sipping her tea. She looked it over, raised an eyebrow, and slid it back to me. "Desperate people do desperate things," she said calmly. "She's trying to save face." I knew she was right, but it was infuriating all the same. Karen was clearly trying to intimidate us into leaving, and the fact that she thought she could get away with it showed just how long she had been running her little HOA empire unchecked. Later that evening, as I walked out to grab the mail, one of our neighbors, an older man named Bill, approached me cautiously. "You know," he said in a low voice, "you and your wife did something none of us could. You stood up to her. She's been running this place like a dictator for years. Most of us just gave up fighting her because it wasn't worth the stress. But yesterday? Watching those cops stand at attention for your wife? That was something." I smiled and thanked him, but I also realized then just how deep Karen's influence had run. She had bullied so many families that the entire community lived in quiet fear of her. And that fear had given her power. Of course, Karen wasn't about to let that power slip away so easily. The next morning, she upped the ante. I woke up to the sound of hammering outside and looked out the window to see Karen and two men I had never seen before installing a large sign right at the edge of our driveway. The sign, written in bold red letters, read, "Property in violation, HOA action pending." I couldn't believe it. She was now publicly branding our home as if it was condemned. I stormed outside, demanding she take it down, but she just crossed her arms and sneered. "It's perfectly within my authority," she declared. "Everyone in this neighborhood will know you're freeloaders until you pay up." My wife joined me outside, but instead of shouting, she simply pulled out her phone and started taking photos and video of Karen, the men, and the sign. "You might want to stop," she said coolly. "Everything you're doing right now is illegal, and I will personally make sure the right people see this." For the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation cross Karen's face, but she masked it quickly. "Do whatever you want," she snapped. You don't scare me. But I could tell she was rattled. What Karen didn't know was that my wife wasn't bluffing. That evening, she made a few calls to some old contacts from her military days. While she never liked to throw her rank or connections around, she wasn't about to let a petty HOA tyrant keep harassing us. She explained the situation to a retired judge she knew, who immediately pointed out multiple legal violations Karen was committing. Filing false police reports, posting fraudulent notices, public defamation, trespassing, the list went on. My wife gathered every piece of evidence we had, the notices, the videos, the recordings, even the testimonies from neighbors who were finally willing to speak up. By the time the sun set, we had a full case file ready to go. I remember asking her, "So, what's the plan? Sue her? Get the HOA dissolved?" She gave me a small smile and said, "Not yet. Sometimes the best way to stop a bully is to let them walk themselves into the trap." And sure enough, Karen wasn't finished digging her own grave. The following weekend, she tried her boldest stunt yet. While we were out grocery shopping, she actually brought in a group of so-called HOA enforcers, basically a couple of guys in matching polo shirts, and had them trespass onto our property. When we pulled back into the driveway, there they were, measuring our deck with tape, snapping pictures of our windows, and writing things down on clipboards. Karen stood behind them, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Make sure you get photos of that illegal dock. And that fire pit, absolutely unacceptable." I slammed the car door and shouted, "Get off my property." The men froze, clearly not expecting us to show up. Karen, though, puffed out her chest and shouted back, "They have every right to be here. This is an HOA inspection, and you can't stop us." But before I could say another word, my wife stepped forward. She didn't yell, didn't raise her voice, she simply pulled out her phone again and said, "Gentlemen, you are trespassing. Unless you want to be arrested, I suggest you leave immediately." Something about the way she said it, steady, commanding, unshakable, made the men drop their tape measures and bolt toward their cars without another word. Karen shouted after them, furious, but it was no use. They weren't about to risk trouble for her little power games. Karen, of course, wasn't done screaming. "This isn't over," she shrieked, pointing a finger at us. "You're finished here. I'll have the entire board vote you out." But her voice was shaking now, and I could see it in her eyes, fear. For the first time, Karen realized she wasn't in control anymore. My wife looked her dead in the eye and said calmly, "No, Karen. You're the one who's finished." And that's when I knew things were about to turn in our favor for good. Karen had overplayed her hand, and now she was standing on the edge of losing everything she thought she controlled. The days that followed felt like the calm before a storm. The neighborhood was buzzing with whispers, everyone talking about how Karen had finally been put in her place. People who had once been too afraid to even make eye contact with her were suddenly a little bolder, waving at us when we walked by, offering quiet words of encouragement. Bill, the older neighbor who had spoken to me before, stopped me one afternoon while I was checking the mail. "You two have no idea how long we've been waiting for someone to stand up to her," he said. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. She fines people for having the wrong shade of paint on their shutters, for planting flowers she doesn't like, even for leaving their car parked outside overnight. Families have sold their homes just to get away from her. But now," he gave me a grin. "Now she's exposed." He was right. Karen had spent so long bullying everyone with fake rules and scare tactics that she never thought anyone would actually fight back. But she had underestimated us, especially my wife. And while we were ready to let the whole thing go if she backed down, Karen just couldn't stop herself. That's the thing about people drunk on power, they don't know when to quit. 3 days later, Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting. Flyers were shoved into everyone's mailboxes, claiming there would be a vote to remove disruptive homeowners from the neighborhood. She didn't put our names on the flyer, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. My wife raised an eyebrow when she read it and said, "Perfect. This is exactly the trap she's setting for herself." That Friday evening, the HOA meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse. The room was packed, neighbors filled every seat, others stood along the walls, and more listened from the doorway. You could feel the tension in the air. At the front of the room was Karen, standing behind a table with her trusty clipboard and a stack of papers that she waved around dramatically. This community, she began in her loud, sharp voice, has always prided itself on order, on rules, on standards. But recently, we've had outsiders move in who refuse to pay their dues, refuse to follow the rules, and openly disrespect the HOA. They are freeloaders who will bring down the value of our homes and destroy everything we've worked so hard to build. Tonight, we must vote to remove them before they ruin this community. A few people clapped politely, but most sat in silence. Then Karen called on us. "Stand up and explain yourselves," she barked. My wife and I stood, calm and steady, and walked to the front of the room. My wife set a neat folder on the table, opened it, and began to speak, not loudly, not angrily, but with the kind of steady authority that silences a room. "For weeks," she said, "this woman has harassed us with fraudulent notices, fake fines, and illegal demands. She called the police on us, wasting their time with lies. She has trespassed on our property, posted defamatory signs, and attempted to intimidate us into paying a fee that doesn't exist. And we have proof." With that, she pulled out the stack of evidence we had gathered, photos of the fake signs, the typed notices with the bogus seal, the video of Karen trespassing on our property with her so-called inspectors, and even a recording of her screaming about a $250,000 initiation fee. Gasps rippled through the crowd as neighbors leaned forward to get a better look. My wife continued, "This isn't about rules or community standards. This is about control. She has been using fear and intimidation to line her pockets and bully this neighborhood for years. But it ends today." Karen's face turned crimson. She slammed her hand on the table and shouted, "Lies. All lies. You can't trust anything they say. They're just trying to destroy me because they know I run this community." But her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the neighbors. That's when one of the officers from before entered the room. He wasn't in uniform this time, but everyone recognized him. He stood near the back and said in a loud, clear voice, "Everything they just said is true. I was there when she called us with a false report. I saw the evidence myself. And I'll be filing my statement with the county." His words hit like a hammer. Karen's mouth fell open, and the room erupted in murmurs. Then Bill stood up. "She fined me $500 for planting roses instead of tulips," he said bitterly. Another woman stood. "She threatened to tow my car because my guest parked in front of my own house." One by one, neighbors rose and began sharing their stories, their voices growing louder and angrier as they realized they weren't alone. For years, Karen had isolated them, made them feel like they were the only ones fighting back, but now the truth was spilling out all at once. Karen tried to shout over them, waving her arms wildly. "Order! Order! I'm still the HOA president, and I demand order." But no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned completely against her. Someone shouted, "Vote her out," and the room roared in agreement. Ballots were scribbled down on scraps of paper, hands raised, voices unified. Within minutes, the vote was unanimous. Karen was removed as HOA president effective immediately. The look on her face was priceless, shock, fury, humiliation all rolled into one. She tried to protest, screaming about how she would sue everyone in the room, how they couldn't do this to her, but no one paid her any mind. Two of the board members escorted her out of the clubhouse, and the door slammed shut behind her. For the first time, the neighborhood felt free. After the meeting, dozens of neighbors came up to us, shaking our hands, thanking my wife, and even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. One woman, nearly in tears, said, "We've been living in fear of her for so long. I can't believe it's finally over." My wife, ever humble, just smiled and said, "It wasn't just us. It was all of you deciding enough was enough." In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Without Karen's constant harassment, people started planting gardens, kids played outside without being yelled at, and neighbors actually began talking to each other again. The HOA board restructured, eliminating the ridiculous fines and rules that Karen had invented, and focused instead on real community improvements, things like fixing the clubhouse roof and maintaining the walking trails. As for Karen, she vanished. Rumor had it she tried to fight the decision legally, but with all the evidence stacked against her, she didn't stand a chance. Eventually, her house went up for sale, and she moved away. No one missed her. And us? We finally had the peaceful lakefront life we had dreamed of. We became close with many of the neighbors, hosting barbecues and bonfires by the water. Every now and then, someone would joke about how it took a general to defeat a dictator, and we'd all laugh. But beneath the humor was something deeper, a sense of relief, of freedom, of community finally restored. Looking back, I realized Karen had made one fatal mistake. She thought she could intimidate us like she had everyone else. She thought her fake authority and loud voice were enough to scare us into submission. But what she didn't realize was that when you try to bully the wrong people, when you call the cops on the wrong family, sometimes you end up exposing yourself for exactly what you are. And sometimes, the very people you think will back you up end up standing at attention, saluting the person you tried to tear down. And that, right there, was the day Karen's reign ended and our dream life by the lake truly began.